My name is Claire Whitmore. I'm 30 years old. And this is the story of how my mother tried to steal my newborn son, just to protect my sister's perfect wedding. It happened during what should have been the happiest season of my life. I live in a small, picturesque town in Vermont where early autumn smells like cinnamon and every window overflows with pumpkins and wreaths. It's the kind of town people move to when they want peace. And for a long time, I believed peace was something I had found. Until my family tore it apart. 3 weeks ago, I gave birth to my son, Nathaniel James Whitmore, Nate for short. The moment I heard his cry, time stopped. Thought, this is it. This is what life is supposed to feel like. My husband, Mark, held my hand so tightly I thought we might both pass out from pure joy. But even in that perfect moment, there was a shadow. Because ever since I announced my pregnancy, my mother, Victoria Whitmore, had treated it like a scandal. You see, Victoria was always obsessed with appearances. She came from a long line of women who believed that success wasn't measured in degrees or bank accounts, but in how perfect your Christmas cards looked. And if there was one daughter who fit that image, it wasn't me. It was my younger sister, Lila. Lila, the golden child. The one with a sparkling smile, the sorority sisters, the fiancé from a wealthy family who hosted barbecues at their lakeside estate. Lila was getting married in December, just a few weeks after my due date. And in my mother's eyes, that was a disaster. I still remember the day Victoria showed up uninvited to my house, clutching a box of lavender macaroons from the town bakery. She sat down on my couch like she owned it, crossed her legs and smiled sweetly. "Claire, darling," she said, her voice dripping with fake warmth. "We need to talk." I braced myself, one hand resting protectively over my growing belly. "You understand," she continued, "that Lila's wedding is a once-in-a-lifetime event. It's the culmination of everything we've worked so hard for. The last thing she needs is distractions." "Distractions," I repeated, dumbfounded. "You know how people are," she said, sipping her tea delicately. "A new baby at a family event. It will shift all the attention. We can't have guests cooing over a newborn when they should be admiring the bride." I stared at her in disbelief. "Are you asking me to hide my son?" She smiled, unbothered. "Delay announcing his birth. At least until after the wedding. It's only fair to Lila." Fair. That word rattled around in my mind like a marble in a glass jar. Had anything ever been fair between me and Lila? I was the one who stayed behind, who took care of my parents when they got sick, who worked double shifts at the clinic while Lila jet-set to Cabo and Maui with her college friends. But it didn't matter. Lila was the crown jewel. I was the dusty old keepsake tucked away in a drawer. I said nothing. Just watched her pick imaginary lint off her pristine skirt, as if my very presence contaminated her. When she finally left, leaving the macaroons on the table like a bribe, I stood there for a long time, one hand on my stomach, promising Nate and myself that I would never let anyone make him feel like he was an inconvenience. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The day Nate was born, Victoria wasn't at the hospital. Instead, she posted a carefully curated Instagram story of her having brunch with Lila at a wedding dress fitting. The caption read, "Moments that matter most. Ring sparkling heart." Not a word about her grandson. Not a text. Not a call. Not a single acknowledgement. Hurt more than I expected. But Mark kissed my forehead, held our baby and whispered, "Family isn't who shares your blood. It's who shows up when you need them." I told myself that was enough. 3 days after we brought Nate home, a letter slipped under our front door. It wasn't a congratulations card. It wasn't flowers. It was a cold, typed note from my mother. "Please do not bring the baby to Lila's wedding. We appreciate your understanding. No love, Mom." No signature at all. Mark crumpled the letter in his fist, his jaw clenching so hard I thought he might break his teeth. "Enough is enough," he said. "You don't owe her anything." But still, some small, stubborn part of me hurt. Because no matter how much Victoria had disappointed me, some wounded child inside me still wished she would love me the way she loved Lila. I held Nate tighter against my chest and tried to let it go. And for a few days I almost did. Until my Aunt Ruth, Victoria's estranged older sister, called me, her voice shaking. "Claire, is it true?" she asked. "Your mother said you're putting Nate up for adoption." The world tilted under my feet. "What?" gasped. "No. Why would she say that? She's been telling everyone you're overwhelmed, that you're not fit to raise a baby, that you've already signed the papers." I clutched Nate so tightly he whimpered, and I loosened my grip, tears flooding my eyes. "I would never," I whispered. "Never." Aunt Ruth was silent for a moment, then said, "Claire, honey, I think you need to check into what she's really planning." The call ended, but the panic didn't. I turned to Mark, who had heard the whole conversation. His face was pale, his mouth tight. "You don't think," I began. He nodded grimly. "She's trying to take him." At first it seemed impossible, absurd. But then I remembered the lengths my mother would go to for appearances. I remembered how she once forged a doctor's note to excuse Lila from finals so she could go to a pageant. I remembered how she lied to neighbors about my college scholarship, saying it was partial when I had actually earned a full ride. It wasn't impossible. It wasn't even surprising. And for the first time in my life I realized, if I didn't stand up now, I could lose everything. I would not let my mother take my son. Not now. Not ever. The night after Aunt Ruth's call, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured someone coming to our door, reaching for Nate, slipping him away before I could scream. I kept waking up in a cold sweat, checking that he was still there, breathing softly in the bassinet beside me. Mark didn't sleep either. He sat up, watching over us both, as if sheer will could keep the world at bay. By morning, we both knew we couldn't wait for something to happen. We had to act first. Mark called the family attorney, Mr. Blakely, a sharp, silver-haired man who had helped us draft our wills when I first got pregnant. When we explained what was happening, there was a long silence on the line before he spoke. "Claire," he said gently, "do you have any reason to believe your mother could have accessed any of your personal documents? Birth certificates, hospital paperwork." My blood went cold. "My hospital records," I whispered. "She visited once before I gave birth. She knows the hospital. She could have pulled something." Mark cursed under his breath, his hand curling into a fist. Mr. Blakely's voice turned brisk, efficient. "Here's what we're going to do," he said. "First, we're filing a protective order. It's usually used for domestic situations, but in this case, it will serve to legally bar her from any custody attempts. Second, we'll notify the adoption agencies in the state. Make sure there's a record that no adoption requests made in your name are legitimate without your direct in-person approval." "Can she still try something?" Yes. There was a pause. "She can try. But she won't succeed." Hanging up, I felt a little steadier. Not safe yet, but at least no longer completely powerless. Still, as the hours crept by, an invisible noose tightened around my chest. Every knock at the door, every unknown phone number flashing on my screen made my heart seize. Was it the agency? Was it someone coming to take my son? Then, just before dusk, the phone rang again. It was her. Victoria. I didn't want to answer. Every instinct screamed to let it go to voicemail. But Mark, who always believed in facing things head-on, nodded toward the phone. Picked up. "Hello." My voice was tighter than I wanted it to be. "Claire." My mother's voice was breathless, almost frantic. "Please listen to me. Before someone else calls you." I said nothing. "I went to an agency," she said. I told them you were considering placing Nathaniel for adoption." "You what?" "I forged some paperwork," she rushed on. "I thought if I made it look like you were willing, that it would be easier. For everyone. For Lila. For the family." My legs buckled. I sank down onto the couch, clutching the armrest like it could anchor me. "You were going to steal my child," I said, my voice shaking. "You forged my signature. You lied." "It was for the best," she cried. You're overwhelmed. You're struggling. Look at you, Claire. You were never ready for this. I looked down at Nate, asleep against my chest. His tiny hand curled into a fist over my heart. I'm ready enough, I said, my voice deadly quiet. Ready enough to protect him from you. I hung up without another word. Mark crossed the room in 2 strides, pulling me into his arms. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, numb, feeling the world shift permanently under my feet. That night, Mr. Blakely filed an emergency petition in family court on our behalf. We documented everything: the phone call, the forged paperwork, Aunt Ruth's testimony. We contacted the hospital where Nate was born and flagged our files. We even installed security cameras around the house. No more hoping she would come to her senses. No more waiting for things to get worse. I was done being the daughter who swallowed betrayal just because it came with the word family attached. 3 days later, I received a letter from the adoption agency. Not an official notice. A personal apology from the caseworker, Denise Meyer, who had flagged the forgery. I am deeply sorry for the distress this has caused you, she wrote. Please know we have reported the incident to local authorities, and the agency has implemented stricter safeguards to prevent this from happening again. Authorities. It was real now. Not just a family drama. Criminal investigation. Victoria Whitmore was being formally investigated for document forgery, falsifying medical information, and attempted unlawful adoption. And she had done it all thinking she could get away with it, that I would be too weak, too broken, too eager for her approval to fight back. She didn't know me at all. A week after that letter, I stood outside the county courthouse, Nate bundled against my chest in a soft blue wrap, Mark's hand strong on my back. The courthouse loomed tall and cold against the gray October sky. It felt like standing at the gates of another world, a world where I had to leave behind the little girl who had once begged her mother to be proud of her. I pressed a kiss to Nate's forehead. I'm not doing this for revenge, I thought. I'm doing this so you'll never have to know the kind of hurt I lived with. Inside, our lawyer met us at the security checkpoint. His face was grave, but there was a fire in his eyes. Are you ready? He asked. He nodded. Mark squeezed my hand. And together, we stepped through the metal detectors into the courtroom, into the battle I never wanted but could no longer avoid. Because this time, I wasn't just Claire Whitmore, the overlooked daughter. I was Nate's mother. And no one, not even my own blood, would ever steal that from me. Not while I still had breath in my body. The courthouse smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and something older, deeper. The kind of worn wood and paper scent that spoke of decades of broken promises, desperate pleas, and shattered illusions. I felt like I was walking into the center of all those old echoes, carrying my child like a shield against the world. We sat in a small conference room off the main hallway, waiting. Mark paced quietly, a restless tiger in a too small cage, while I rocked Nate gently, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. Every few minutes I glanced at the door, half expecting Victoria to burst through it, demanding we drop everything for the sake of family. Instead, it was Mr. Blakely who entered first, carrying a slim file folder in his hand. His mouth was a grim, tight line. Her attorneys filed a preliminary response, he said, sitting across from us. They're not denying the forgery. Their argument is going to be emotional. Family misunderstanding. No criminal intent. I stared at him, stunned. No criminal intent. She tried to give away my child. I know, he said quietly. But you have to understand. Public sympathy often bends toward the older generation. She's just a confused grandmother. She didn't mean any harm. It's not right, but it happens. Mark leaned forward, his voice like steel wrapped in velvet. We're not backing down. Mr. Blakely gave a small nod, as if he had been waiting for that. Good. Because this is going to get uglier before it gets better. As if summoned by those words, a knock rattled the door. The court officer poked his head in. Ms. Whitmore. They're ready for you. I stood, my knees surprisingly steady. Mark adjusted the car seat carrier on his arm, cradling Nate like a sacred artifact. As we walked into the courtroom, the chatter stopped. Heads turned. I saw faces I hadn't seen in years. Neighbors, old friends of the family, even some distant cousins who had no business being there. The spectacle was irresistible, apparently. And there, sitting at the defendant's table, was my mother, Victoria Whitmore. She looked older than I remembered. Her blonde hair, once immaculate, had dulled to a washed-out yellow, pulled back too tightly. Her designer suit hung a little looser than usual, as if even her pride had started to sag. But her eyes were still sharp, still cold. When she saw Nate, she flinched, just for a moment. A flicker of something, regret, fear, shame, passed over her face. Then it hardened back into stone. The judge entered, a stern woman with graying hair and sharp glasses perched on the bridge of her nose. The room rose and sat again in unison. The hearing began. It wasn't a full trial, not yet. This was just the first step, the formal reading of the charges, the establishment of conditions, and the decision about whether to proceed to a full criminal trial. Still, every word felt like a hammer on my heart. Victoria and Whitmore, you are charged with falsifying legal documents with the intent to facilitate the unlawful adoption of a minor, forgery of official medical records, and misrepresentation in matters of legal custody. The list went on. I felt Mark's hand slide into mine under the table, his thumb brushing calming circles on my skin. Victoria's lawyer stood up and launched into his defense. He was smooth, polished, a man who had probably gotten plenty of guilty people off with nothing more than a charming smile and a few well-placed sob stories. My client is a devoted mother and grandmother, he said, voice ringing with manufactured sorrow. She acted out of confusion, fear for her daughter's well-being, and a misguided attempt to protect her family's stability during a sensitive time. There was no malicious intent, only love. Misdirected. I wanted to scream. Love. Was that what we were calling it now? When the judge asked if I wished to make a statement, I rose slowly, my knees locking painfully. I walked to the front, Nate sleeping soundly against my chest, his tiny weight grounding me. I cleared my throat, my voice small at first, but growing stronger with each word. Your Honor, I have no doubt my mother believes she acted for the sake of the family's image. But intention does not erase harm. Love is not control. It's not lying, it's not forging documents, it's not trying to steal someone's child because you don't approve of the timing. I paused, looking directly at Victoria. For 30 years, I tried to earn her approval. I twisted myself into shapes I hated, trying to be the daughter she could love. And even now, even after she tried to destroy my life, part of me still wants her to stand up and say she's sorry. But I realize that day will never come. I turned back to the judge. I'm not doing this to punish her. I'm doing it to protect my son. To show him that his mother fought for him, that she never let anyone, not even her own blood, decide his fate without a battle. The room was dead silent when I finished. The judge studied me for a long moment. Then she nodded once and said, "This case will proceed to trial." It was like the world cracked open and a flood of relief poured in. Victoria's face crumpled for just a split second before she composed herself again, her jaw tight enough to crack. The gavel banged. The hearing was over. As we gathered our things, I saw her mouth something across the courtroom. One word: traitor. I didn't flinch. I didn't lower my gaze. I just lifted Nate higher against my heart and walked out of the courtroom without looking back. Outside, the cool autumn air hit my face like a blessing. Mark kissed my forehead. "You did it," he whispered. I smiled faintly. We did it. But I knew this was only the beginning. Because when people like Victoria lose control, they don't just retreat. They fight dirtier. And somehow I could feel it. The next storm was already gathering. But this time I wouldn't be caught off guard. I was ready. For whatever came next. The weeks that followed felt like walking across a frozen lake, never sure which step might send me plunging through. Every day brought a new ripple. A phone call from my Uncle Raymond, begging me to drop the charges. An anonymous letter in my mailbox, scrawled in shaky handwriting, calling me ungrateful and heartless. A whisper at the grocery store from an old neighbor. I heard what you did to your poor mother. Mark wanted me to block every call, every email, every message. Part of me agreed. But another part, the stubborn, scarred part that had grown up in Victoria Whitmore's house, refused to flinch. Let them talk. Let them spread their stories. I knew the truth. And that truth was sleeping upstairs every night, bundled in soft blankets, breathing in tiny, even puffs that stitched my broken heart back together. Nate was my anchor, my why. The trial was set for late November, just days before Thanksgiving. A brutal irony, given how fractured the idea of family had become for me. Mark and I spent the days leading up to it gathering evidence, meeting with Mr. Blakely, and reinforcing the house security system again. We weren't taking any chances. The night before the trial, I stood in Nate's room, watching him sleep, one hand on the edge of his crib. Mark came in quietly, wrapping his arms around me from behind. "You're doing the right thing," he whispered against my hair. "I know," I said. And I did. But the knowing didn't make it hurt less. "I'm scared," I admitted. "Of what?" "Of seeing her," I said. "Of looking at her face and remembering all the times I made excuses for her. Of still wanting something from her, even after everything." Mark turned me around gently. "You don't owe her anything, Claire. Not love. Not forgiveness. Nothing. You owe Nate. You owe yourself." I nodded, blinking back tears. "I know." And deep down I did. I knew that sometimes the bravest thing you could do wasn't fighting an enemy. It was walking away from someone you once thought you couldn't live without. The morning of the trial dawned cold and gray. Mark dressed Nate carefully, bundling him into a warm onesie and a tiny knitted hat. He wouldn't come with us to the courthouse. Mark's sister Allison would watch him, but I kissed his forehead before we left, breathing in his milky sweet scent like armor against the day ahead. The courthouse was buzzing when we arrived. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and crackling. Victoria was already there, seated stiffly beside her lawyer. She wore a black dress, pearls, and an expression of perfect, icy composure. But her hands trembled when she thought no one was looking. The trial began. Testimonies were given. Evidence was presented. The caseworker from the adoption agency, Denise Meyer, took the stand first, her voice steady and clear as she described how Victoria had approached them under false pretenses. "I became suspicious," Denise said, "because Mrs. Whitmore was insistent on expediting the process without proper documentation. When we requested medical records and parental consent forms, the ones she provided had inconsistencies." She detailed how an internal investigation revealed the forged signatures, mine and Mark's, and how Victoria's story crumbled under even mild questioning. When it was my turn, I walked to the stand with my heart hammering so loudly I thought everyone could hear it. I told the truth. Not just about what had happened in the past few months, but about a lifetime of being second best, of being loved conditionally, of being treated like a burden rather than a blessing. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just spoke. And maybe that calmness, that refusal to perform grief or anger the way Victoria always demanded, was what shook her the most. Because when the defense called Victoria to the stand, she crumbled. She tried to paint herself as the victim, the misunderstood mother who only wanted the best for her daughters. She tried to justify it all, the forgery, the lies, the betrayal, with the tired old excuse. "I was thinking of the family." But under cross-examination, her mask slipped. Mr. Blakely asked one simple question. "Mrs. Whitmore, at any point, did you consider what Claire, your daughter, wanted for her own child?" Victoria hesitated. And in that hesitation, the courtroom heard everything. Well, she hadn't considered me at all. Only Lila. Only appearances. Only herself. The trial ended that afternoon. The judge took a short recess before delivering her decision. I sat beside Mark, my hands shaking so badly I had to lace them together to keep from falling apart. When the judge returned, she didn't mince words. "Victoria and Whitmore," she said, voice firm, You are hereby found guilty of attempted unlawful adoption, document forgery, and misrepresentation in legal custody proceedings. Given your age, lack of prior criminal record, and willingness to accept a plea arrangement, this court sentences you to 2 years probation, 100 hours of community service, a $25,000 fine, and mandatory counseling. There was a gasp from the back of the courtroom. I recognized the sound of one of Victoria's old friends, a woman who once complimented my sister's engagement ring while pretending not to notice my lack of one. Victoria sagged in her seat, her face ashen. But the judge wasn't finished. Furthermore, she continued, this court recognizes Claire Whitmore as the sole legal guardian of Nathaniel James Whitmore, free from any interference by extended family unless explicitly invited. It was done. The gavel fell. The courtroom exploded into murmurs. Mark squeezed my hand until I thought my bones might break. But I welcomed the pain. It meant I was still here. Still standing. We walked out into the biting November wind, the courthouse doors slamming shut behind us like the final nail in a coffin. Mark turned to me, eyes shining. You did it, he said. I shook my head slowly. We did it. And we had. Not just won a legal battle, but ended a lifetime of silent suffering. As we climbed into the car, I looked back once, not at Victoria, but at the courthouse itself, the place where I had finally reclaimed my life. I thought about everything I had lost, everything I had gained, and the tiny, perfect boy waiting at home for me. He was my future. And nothing, not lies, not blood, not betrayal, would ever take that from me again. When we got home that night, it felt like stepping into a different world. The house was warm, filled with the soft smell of vanilla candles and fresh laundry. Allison had left a note on the kitchen counter. Nate was perfect as always. Congrats, Mama Bear. Proud of you. I touched the paper gently, feeling tears sting the back of my eyes. Mark slid his arms around me, resting his chin on my shoulder. You want to go get him, or should I? Let's go together, I whispered. We walked down the hall, our hands finding each other's in the dim light. When we pushed open Nate's nursery door, I saw him there, curled up in his crib, one chubby fist tucked under his cheek, breathing in tiny, even puffs. I knelt down beside the crib and just watched him for a long time, listening to the faint hum of the white noise machine and the soothing rhythm of his breathing. I kept you safe, I whispered. I kept my promise. Behind me, Mark rested his hand on my back, silent and strong. We had won. We had survived. But survival didn't erase the scars. 2 days later, the backlash began. Not from strangers, I didn't care about them, but from people I had once called family. Emails, voicemails, even letters in the mailbox. You've ruined your mother's life. How could you drag your own blood through court like a common criminal? Your father would be ashamed of you. Some came from cousins who hadn't spoken to me in years. Some came from old family friends. Some were anonymous, written in cramped, furious handwriting. I deleted the voicemails. I threw away the letters. But the words burrowed into me like tiny needles. Mark caught me sitting at the kitchen table one night, staring at an unopened envelope, my hands trembling. You don't have to read it, he said gently. I know, I said. But I feel like, if I don't face it, it'll just keep festering. He sat down across from me, patient, waiting. I opened the envelope. It was from Uncle Raymond. Claire, it read, I hope you're happy. Your mother's a shell of the woman she once was. She's lost everything because of you. Her reputation, her friends, her dignity. Was that your goal? To destroy her? Congratulations. You succeeded. I set the letter down carefully, as if it might explode. Mark reached across the table and took my hand. You didn't destroy her, he said quietly. She destroyed herself. He nodded. I knew that. But knowing didn't erase the ache. That night, after Mark had gone to bed, I sat by Nate's crib again, running my fingers through his soft baby hair. I used to think being good meant sacrificing everything, I whispered to him. My dreams, my happiness, my dignity. But that's not love, I said. That's erasure. And I won't disappear. Not for anyone. Nate stirred slightly, making a soft, contented sigh. I kissed his forehead and made a silent vow. I will raise you to know that love isn't a chain. Swings. The days turned colder. Thanksgiving came and went without a word from my mother. Christmas crept closer, thick with memories I didn't want to remember. Every store window was a battlefield. Smiling families in matching sweaters, grandmothers cradling rosy-cheeked babies. Should have broken me. But instead something inside me hardened. Solidified. I started building a new life. I signed up for a mother's group at the community center. Real women, messy and honest, not obsessed with appearances. I started therapy, finally unpacking decades of invisible wounds. I even enrolled in an online course to finish the degree I had abandoned years ago when my father got sick. Slowly, day by day, I rebuilt myself. Not the obedient daughter. Not the second-place sister. Just Claire. Just me. One evening, as I was folding laundry in the living room, Mark came in holding a large, padded envelope. "No return address," he said, setting it on the coffee table. I wiped my hands on a towel and opened it cautiously. Inside was a single piece of paper. No letter. No apology. Just a legal document. Victoria Whitmore had officially relinquished any future claims to Nate. She had signed away her rights to seek visitation or custody. Forever. At the bottom, in her tight, elegant handwriting, she had scrawled one final note. "You win." I sat back slowly, the paper trembling in my hands. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't love. But it was something. Closure, maybe. Or maybe just a final, bitter surrender. Mark leaned over, reading the paper with me. "Are you okay?" he asked. I smiled. A small, fierce smile that felt like the first real one in months. "I'm free," I said. And I was. Truly, finally free. The next morning, I took Nate for a walk through the snowy streets of our neighborhood. The world was hushed and white, every tree branch wrapped in delicate frost. I pulled the stroller to a stop at the top of a small hill. The town spread out below us like a painting. I bent down and whispered into Nate's ear, "You're the reason I survived." He blinked up at me, wide-eyed and solemn, as if he understood. "You're my reason for everything," I said. And in that moment, with the cold air stinging my cheeks and my heart beating steady and strong, I knew the past no longer owned me. I had walked through fire. I had walked through betrayal and grief and loneliness so deep it had almost swallowed me whole. And I had come out the other side carrying something they could never take. Oh, future. A life not built on someone else's expectations, but on love. Real messy, imperfect love. Nate cooed softly, reaching for my face with his tiny mittened hand. I kissed his palm and smiled through the tears blurring my vision. "We're going to be okay," I promised him. Better than okay. We stood there for a long time, two small figures against the vast, frozen sky. A mother and her son. Unbreakable. Winter settled over Vermont like a heavy, glittering quilt. The days shortened, the nights deepened, and everything seemed to move a little slower, a little heavier. But inside our home, life pulsed with new warmth. Mark and I spent quiet evenings by the fire, Nate curled between us, his tiny fists grabbing at our fingers. We built a new rhythm, one free of whispered threats and looming shadows. For the first time in my life, peace wasn't something I dreamed about. It was something I lived. But peace, I learned, doesn't mean the past stays buried. One Friday afternoon in January, I got a call from Aunt Ruth. I almost didn't answer. Part of me was terrified of hearing more guilt, more pleas to let it go, as if the hurt could be shoved aside like an ugly piece of furniture. But when I heard her voice, it wasn't angry. It was shaking. "Claire," she said, almost whispering, "you need to know. Your mother's not doing well." I didn't say anything. She's fallen on hard times," Aunt Ruth continued. "The community service, the fines, the social fallout. She's lost most of her friends. Lila barely speaks to her anymore." I closed my eyes, the old ache threatening to claw its way back. "She made her choices," I said quietly. I know, Aunt Ruth said, her voice breaking. But she's still your mother. There it was. The old chain, the one that had been wrapped around my neck since I was a child. She's still your mother. As if biology excused everything. As if giving birth meant you were entitled to a lifetime of loyalty, no matter how deeply you cut. I'm sorry, I said, meaning it. But I have my own family to protect now. Aunt Ruth didn't argue. Maybe she saw, finally, that I was no longer the girl she could shame back into submission. After we hung up, I sat by the window for a long time, watching the snow fall in soft, heavy flakes. Mark came over, setting a cup of tea beside me without a word. Nate babbled happily from his playpen, oblivious to the storm inside my heart. I thought about my mother, about Lila, about all the ways love had been twisted into a weapon in our family. And I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even hurt. I was simply done. A few days later I received a letter. Not from Victoria this time. From Lila. I recognized her sweeping, dramatic handwriting instantly. For a moment, I debated throwing it away unread. But something, curiosity, closure, maybe just a need to end it properly, made me open it. Claire, it began. I suppose congratulations are in order. You won. You always wanted to be the center of attention, and now you are. You've ruined Mom's life, humiliated our family, and for what? Baby. A little pity party. I hope you're happy in your tiny little house with your tiny little life. Don't bother reaching out. As far as I'm concerned, you're no sister of mine. There was no signature. No love. Just venom. I laughed. A short, breathless sound that surprised even me. Mark looked up from the couch, concerned. What is it? I held up the letter. Lila. Still thinks I'm trying to steal her spotlight. Mark rolled his eyes. Let her rot in her own bitterness. I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in months. I plan to, I said. I folded the letter once, then twice, then tucked it into the back of a drawer. Not out of sentiment, but as a reminder. A reminder that I had made the right choice. Not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. Weeks passed. The snow melted. The first buds of spring appeared on the trees outside our kitchen window. And with the changing seasons, a new opportunity blossomed. One I never expected. Mr. Blakely called one afternoon with news. Claire, he said, I've been asked to recommend a community liaison for a new program at the courthouse. Someone to help young mothers navigate legal protections, especially in cases involving custody threats or family interference. Blinked, stunned. Me? Yes, he said. You have a story that could help others. And a strength that's hard to find. I looked over at Nate, who was trying, and mostly failing, to stack his building blocks into a tower. Hope bloomed in my chest. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was becoming something stronger. I accepted the offer. Over the next few weeks, I started volunteering part-time at the courthouse, sitting with terrified young women who were facing battles they never asked for. I shared my story when it felt right. I listened more than I spoke. And slowly, piece by piece, I started to heal the parts of myself that even victory hadn't touched. One afternoon, after a particularly emotional session, I stepped outside into the spring sunshine and saw something that stopped me cold. Across the street, sitting alone on a bench, was Victoria. She looked smaller somehow, not just physically but in spirit. Her hair was limp, her clothes wrinkled. She clutched a thin coat around her shoulders even though the day was warm. She was staring at the courthouse. Me. For a long moment, our eyes met across the distance. She didn't move. Neither did I. There was no dramatic confrontation. No screaming. No tears. Just two women staring at each other. A lifetime of hurt and love and regret hanging heavy in the space between. I thought about crossing the street. About sitting beside her. About asking why. But then Nate's laugh floated through the air. Bright, clear, pure, and I turned away. Had my answer. And it wasn't on that bench. It was in the life I was building. The family I was protecting. The future I was choosing every single day. I strapped Nate into his car seat, kissed his forehead and whispered, Let's go home. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I glanced back one last time. Victoria was still there. Still waiting. Still trapped in a world I had finally left behind. And for the first time in my life, I felt nothing but peace. Real fierce, earned peace. The kind you don't beg for. The kind you build yourself. Brick by painful brick. Spring came in full bloom that year, as if the world itself was shaking off the dust and sorrow of the past. I spent my mornings walking with Nate through the winding paths of our neighborhood park, the scent of fresh-cut grass and blooming cherry blossoms filling the air. Everywhere I looked, life was bursting free. Unapologetic, unstoppable, untamed. Just like us, Mark and I moved forward with our lives, not forgetting what had happened, but no longer dragging it behind us like a rusted anchor. We bought a small but beautiful house just outside town, a place with a wide front porch and a big backyard where Nate could someday run wild and free. A place where no old ghosts could reach us. At night, after we tucked Nate into bed, Mark and I would sit together under the stars, planning dreams we had once been too tired, too scared to chase. Trips we wanted to take. Projects we wanted to start. The kind of future built on real love, not obligations disguised as loyalty. It wasn't perfect. Some days the old wounds itched. Some nights I woke from dreams where I was back in that courtroom, back in that cold, desperate fight for my son. But every time I looked at Nate, at the way his eyes lit up when he saw me, at the fierce little laugh that made the whole world tilt toward joy, I knew it had been worth it. All of it. One afternoon in late April, I received an unexpected message. Letter. From Victoria. Not a legal notice. Not a bitter screed. Just a plain white envelope, no return address, slipped into our mailbox. I stood on the porch for a long time just staring at it. Mark came out holding 2 mugs of coffee. He saw the envelope and his face darkened. "You don't have to open it," he said, setting the mugs down. "I know," I said. But I did. Not because I needed closure. Not because I hoped for some miracle of remorse. But because I wasn't afraid anymore. Inside was a single page, written in my mother's tight, elegant script. "Blair, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect anything. I only want you to know that I see now what I couldn't see before. You loved your son enough to lose everything else. That's something I never had the courage to do. I hope you live a life so full that you forget I ever tried to steal a piece of it away. Sorry. Victoria." I read it once, then again, then folded it neatly and slid it into the back of my desk drawer, not as a keepsake, but as a monument. A monument to everything I had survived. Mark watched me carefully. "Are you okay?" He nodded. "Yeah, I really am." And I meant it. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I didn't feel obligated to respond. I simply breathed. Free. Oh. A few days later, I stood at the podium at the courthouse for the first time, speaking to a room full of women who had walked, or were still walking, the same road I had. I told them the truth. That betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. That sometimes love is the sharpest weapon. That sometimes healing isn't about forgiving the person who hurt you. It's about forgiving yourself for letting it happen. For a long time, I said, my voice steady, I thought being a good daughter meant setting myself on fire to keep someone else warm. I thought being good meant being quiet, being small, being second. But then I became a mother, I said, glancing at the back of the room where Mark stood holding Nate, his bright blue eyes blinking up at me. And I realized, loving someone doesn't mean disappearing for them. It means standing up for them, even when your knees are shaking, even when your heart is breaking. The room was silent, listening, breathing, living, smiled. And sometimes, I finished, the greatest act of love is choosing yourself, so that you have something true and whole to give the ones who matter most. When I stepped down, I felt lighter than I ever had before. Mark met me with a kiss, brief and fierce, and Nate giggled in his arms. The future stretched out ahead of us, wide, wild, and waiting. I didn't know what storms might come, what battles I might still have to fight. But I knew this. I would face them standing tall. Not for revenge. not for validation, but for the little boy who had taught me that real love doesn't come with conditions, comes with open arms, and the fierce, unwavering promise, you are worth fighting for, always. Sometimes protecting your child or yourself means standing against the very people you once loved most. True family isn't built on blood alone. It's built on loyalty, honesty, and unconditional love. And the greatest strength comes not from holding on, but from having the courage to finally let go. You don't owe anyone your silence in exchange for their comfort. Your life, your voice, your love, they are yours to protect. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to Revenge Echoes for more real, powerful stories that fight for the truth. Leave a comment below sharing your thoughts. Have you ever had to stand up against betrayal from someone you loved? And please share this video. Someone out there needs to hear they are not alone.